Good afternoon. As you heard, my name is Thomas Denker. I'm from Frankfurt, Germany. And before I'm going to say something about myself and the mosaics I make, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to BAM for giving me an opportunity to present myself and my work here, but not only for that, much more for having had the far-sighted idea of inviting DOMO to your event. I think I can call that far-sighted in times when collaboration and togetherness seem to have come a bit out of fashion. Thank you, BAM. I have prepared these foils, slides, or whatever. It's actually HTML pages, and you can find them on the internet. In the last line, you see the URL. So if you have a computer on your knees, you can watch it there, and it might be a bit easier to read the text. It's not much text. You can also hang down your head and just pretend to listen to my presentation and take a nap this way. I've split my stuff in two parts. Part one is a bit about myself. I'm going to say where I come from, what I did before I did mosaics, and I hope to find more understanding here for the weird things I do when I show you in the part two how I make mosaics. The cursor here. Next. Okay, this is the beginning of part one. That's why I have placed a portrait of myself here. I made this on 3 panels. It's more or less life-size altogether. I can highly recommend this approach for any kind of self-portrait, because by the time of hanging, you can just increment the gap between the 3 panels a little bit, and that makes you look much slimmer and taller. Being German, I have to talk about cars. This is a type of cars my parents owned before I was born, or by the time I was born. You can learn 2 things from that. Number 1, cars were already invented when I was born. Number 2, people were poor by that time. My parents were poor too. They couldn't afford to have the car and a baby by the same time. The car was sold and exchanged against another type of vehicle. But after the car was sold, there was some money left, and my poor dad could afford to buy this thing of 1954 high-tech. It's a Zeiss Econ, Super Econta of 1954. When I was old enough, let's say 8, 9, 10 years old, my father explained to me how it worked, and I fell in love with photography a bit. I visited school. That's where the next vehicle comes. This type of car was owned, or not exactly that one, but that model, a Ford Mustang of whatever vintage, by our high school art teacher. The car wasn't the only thing with which the teacher could impress the boys. He was an artist. He had traveled to Ravenna. He told us about the miracles of that town, and he let us make mosaics from paper shavings. I liked that. At home, I began to build my first own mosaic. I collected glass from the many bomb-damaged places which you could by that time still find in Frankfurt. Painted the glass from the backside with acrylic colors, cut it in pieces and cut my fingers 100 times, and produced a mosaic this way. Unfortunately, the work is lost. Then I left the school and began to study physics. At home I had a photo lab, black and white photo lab. And at the Physics Institute, I went to seminars of scientific photography, how it was called, and I spent a lot of hours in dark chambers, but I gave that up again. In hindsight, it was probably because the many hours in the dark chambers didn't pay out, because there were and probably still are no girls who study physics. Okay, then after that I spent some 20, 30 years as an engineer for software and electronic development. And at a certain point, I decided to give my biography another glitch, and I gave up software and hardware development and returned to Mosaics. I visited a class of Arianna Gallo in Ravenna. As a result, this wonderful bird was created there, but I caught fire. At home again, I began to experiment with some kind of technique which would combine photography, computers, and mosaics. And eventually I made that kind of mosaic which you can see here or in the show or somewhere else in the meantime. Yeah, in the year 2008, some 22 artists in Germany founded DOMO, the German equivalent of BAM. And I was one of the founding members. The next year, I became the president of DOMO and stayed in that position for 5 years. In the meantime, some younger and smarter ladies have taken over that job. Yeah, that's mainly what I can tell you about my biography. Now you know what a hard childhood I had. We can switch to part 2. How I make a mosaic. You may have seen the mosaic I have in the show here. It's 40 by 40 centimeters big. This one has the same dimensions, and the technique is also exactly the same, just another motif. The title of that mosaic is Supergirl's Eye. The reason for it is that the owner of the photo was a girl who called herself Supergirl on Facebook. I made it by that time for a mosaic show in Germany with the title Ganz nah, ganz emotional. That's in English, very close, very emotional. I had no idea what I could contribute to that exhibition, and so therefore at a certain time I said, I make a human eye. Began to experiment with my own eye, found that the eyeball is essentially okay. It doesn't age that much as the rest of our body, but there are too many wrinkles around. That's why I searched a better eye on the internet and found a photo, this photo of Supergirl. Supergirl was the owner of, maybe 15 years old by that time, was the owner of the photo and the owner of the eye. To contact her, I became a member of Facebook. I described what my plans with the photos were, and she answered with 3 letters, okay, full stop. That was it, but I could use the photo. This is the original photo. The first step of making the mosaic is cutting the photo. Then you get something like this. By that time I made a mistake. It was supposed to be a quadratic picture, obviously. I miscalculated the dimensions a bit. That's the way it is. In the next step, I resample this picture such that it's reduced to 68 by 60. No, it's first made a bit brighter. That always works positively. And then it's resampled. The resolution is reduced. It's now only 68 by 68 pixels. Well, one sees that, but it's not really influencing the thing very much. After that comes the decisive step, what I call mosaicification. we go from here to there. Okay. Now it has also a black frame around it. Not a big difference, but what has happened is that my computer has substituted the original colors of the picture by one of the 293 colors which are available from the donor color Multifactory in Murano. And the thing doesn't look much different, but now I have the complete design. I know what tessera goes where. The computer produces this kind of simulation of the final mosaic, but also what I call a design plan. No, that's the final design. This took another step from here to there, which is hard to see. I call it recombination. Whenever there are two tessera side by side which have the same color, they are replaced by a rectangular tessera of the double length. And whenever there are 2 by 2 tessera of the same color, 4 tessera of the same color, they are replaced by a big tessera which has quadrupled size. It's hard to see that in the simulation. You will see that in the design plan now. This is a left lower corner of the mosaic. It looks like that before the recombination. Then the computer finds that at certain points you have tessera with the same color, more than one, and it recombines them into bigger tessera. The effect is that you have less work when you assemble it, and it doesn't look like a tiled wall after that. The numbers you see here are the numbers which are assigned by the donor class factory to the different colors. Okay, that's how this mosaic was made. Okay, so the final thing is a bit rougher than the computer simulation. Okay. Now, a couple of questions. The essential question is, does it make any sense, and why I'm doing this? I could easily add up a couple of more questions of this type, but it's hard to find any answer, so I just leave the questions here. What if you begin to think about the thing, then you come very quickly to thinking about photography. What does photography mean to art? From the very first moment when Doug Ware did the first shot, photography influenced art, at least. That's what has to be said. Now, photography these days has undergone an immense change. I'm not talking only about the technique itself, which has been transferred from traditional to digital photography, but it's also the way we use photography in our daily lives. If you think that 50% of the population of this planet has a smartphone in their pocket, and each of these smartphones produces just one picture per day, you will find that we produce this way 4 billion pictures a day. And this is a number which may be bigger than the number of pictures produced between the Stone Age and World War II. And there's it's a flood of information, visual information, which rushes by, and it's very difficult to give any meaning and any special significance to any of these pictures. Implementing a mosaic after it makes it possible to stop the immense stream of visual information for one moment. That's what I think about it. Somebody once asked to whom I had presented my technique, was a bit stunned, and then he said, but what it's about artistic freedom? Where is artistic freedom here? And I had to think along. I couldn't answer the question, but I began to think about it, and what is artistic freedom, and what is freedom in general? Now think about Neil Armstrong, not a mosaic maker. What was his freedom? He definitely didn't have the freedom to push any of the buttons in his spacecraft whenever he had an idea to do that. If he had used that kind of freedom for 1 second, he wouldn't have returned. The only real freedom he had was to fly to the moon or stay at home and make that decision. That was the only freedom he had. So he was a discoverer and adventurer. We are artists. It may nevertheless be that the only freedom we have is making the one decision what to do, what piece of art to create or not to do it, and that's it. After that, you are driven by the environment around you. Okay, now I come to presenting you the ideas of the famous German philosopher Walter Benjamin, who contributed a lot of things to the analysis of reproducible art. Okay, I was kidding. I'm not going to do that. Instead, I just show you 2 more mosaics I made in the past, and then it's all over. This mosaic is titled Apple Store. I made that a couple of years ago. And if I'm taking the position of a critic or who is analyzing that, and you will probably say that this is the work of an old man who is very skeptical against the Apple cult and simply doesn't have the physical stamina to overnight in the front of an Apple shop to await the next iPhone generation there. Okay, it's about 80 centimeters high. The next one is something I called Middle Eastern carpet. It's a bit big, even a bit bigger, so such that you probably cannot see individual tesserae here. Some people who saw it asked if I could also fill up the rest in the right lower corner of it. I had in mind filling that up with a piece of charcoal, but I had to discover that charcoal isn't the ideal material for mosaics. So it's just a piece of black wood. Take this as an expression of my thinking about the depressed state of the part of the world where these kinds of carpets are made. I've been traveling a lot in countries like Syria or Egypt, and it's such a pity that this part of the world is suffering so much. Oh, I didn't expect this picture here. Who knows who it is? Okay, made that recently. I'm giving a workshop tomorrow here. So even if you don't participate, you are invited to come and watch. Maybe this would clear up the strange things I made. Thank you very much.